Started with MVC, right? MVC module and the basic mapping we understand. Right? The basic steps to implement MVC application we learned. We have to create a dynamic web project and we have to add web.xml file. Within that web.xml file, we have to add a dispatcher servlet and we have to create one string XML file by following a naming convention. These are the first four steps. If you ask me in Spring Boot also are we doing this means no, nothing to do with in Spring Boot. This all they wrapped as part of Spring Boot they avoided it. You need not to write all this stuff. Okay, as we are working on core Spring MVC, right? This is how we create a project. Just a minute. Yeah. So don't worry, you need not to write this code in Spring Boot. But if you see any old application, right, this is how they structured it. Okay, they must be created it as a dynamic web project with a web.xml file by configuring dispatcher servlet and one Spring XML file by following a naming convention of your servlet name hyphen servlet.xml file. So we did the same, right? We have done the same here. Old projects you must see within this structure which are implemented 10 years back. New applications not required this much structure. In Spring Boot, simple Spring Boot application is already pre-configured all this stuff. They pre-configured it. This complete these four steps they did as part of Spring Boot implementation. So you need not to bother about this configuration. Directly you can focus on code. Step 1, 2, 3, 4 you can avoid. Just we focus on controllers. Just first these four steps we followed and created dynamic web application. Where is it? Hello world. So we created a dynamic web project and the next step web.xml file. Here we configured dispatcher servlet under servlet class tag. So this is the fully qualified path of it. org spring framework web.servlet.dispatcher servlet, and this class is part of your spring web MVC jar file. Spring web MVC jar file. This class is there. So it is a predefined servlet class from Spring framework. So we can call this controller as a front controller. It follows front controller design pattern. What it means? What is front controller? All web MVC frameworks follow this pattern. All web MVC frameworks will follow which pattern? Front controller design pattern. they follow this design pattern. Even struts followed it. Spring following it. JSF used the same pattern, and Jersey library also, REST library also used the same pattern. Many frameworks followed this front controller design pattern, which is most and very important pattern for the framework implementation. As per this front controller design pattern, yeah, yes, struts 1x, 2x, wicket. There are hundreds of frameworks in Java which are designed. You can, maybe search. Okay. So as per front controller design pattern, okay, they all followed the front controller design pattern and designed these frameworks. What usually front controller design pattern saying? What it is saying? This design pattern saying that let's have any number of front end pages you have. You can have any number of front end pages you have here. These are coming from browser. Any client can access, and they will access your application from browser. So your views, your front end views, or not only from browser, you may have any mobile app and any sort of front end application that you may have here. So your front end during your front end related back end implementations, right? From here I may submit some data or I may request for some data. The only components which responds to HTTP protocol, the only component in Java that responds to HTTP protocol is servlet via web server like Tomcat. When you submit data, right, from browser, you will be giving your Tomcat URL. When you give your Tomcat URL, when you give your Tomcat URL, right, always the data when you submit, first it hits your Tomcat. So via browser when you submit data, it go in the form of HTTP protocol, hypertext transfer protocol. In this form the data will be submitted. All HTTP requests will be submitted to Tomcat. Okay, Tomcat reads. But my Java class also needs the same data, right? Tomcat is a web server. It will help you to route this data to your class also. But which class you need to write for that purpose? You need to write a servlet class. Everywhere you need to have a servlet class. For each form you need to write a servlet class here. For each form you need to write a servlet class here. So based on the mapping which you have given in this view, right, your request will be taken forward to the respective servlet class. Who deals with servlets directly? Tomcat. Tomcat is a container who actually acts like your IOC container. For servlets, for servlet classes, the IOC container is Tomcat. So without Tomcat, you can't create objects for servlets. So you need to create each servlet. For each form, you need to create each servlet. And here you need to write all the read and send response operations. And the data will be given in the form of HTTP protocol only. This HTTP protocol data will be given to you as a HTTP request. You will be getting as a HTTP request Java object. From browser, Tomcat will receive in the form of HTTP protocol, but for you it will give in the form of HTTP request object. So from this request object you can read data and you can take it forward. From here you can forward to your business DAOs and all. But when I say frameworks are not allowing to use servlets as they are sensitive web elements. If you write lot of servlets, they occupy lot of memory. And during servlets, these are the first components who gets the data from front end. These are the first components. After getting data here, you may need to implement a business and a DAO. So we will be using old approach of coding here, creating object of business. Then we send the call to business. No, I'm talking about front controller pattern. Okay. No, not mandatory. Not mandatory. You may have multiple forms to one servlet, but you need to write a lot of code for that. You need to understand what kind of request you got. Then you need to redirect it to a specific. That is what your dispatcher servlet also doing, right? How one single dispatcher servlet is handling the entire application. That is what they did internally. But yeah, you need to write a lot of code for that purpose, and there are no centralized configurations here. In case if you want to handle centralized security, exception handling, validations, your request is separately scattered. This browser to this servlet, this browser to this servlet. They scattered each view to each servlet. If I want to centralize something, I don't have the control here. Yeah, yeah, yes, yes. So here always I deal with this HTTP protocol. Let's say sometimes forms will have hundreds of properties, hundreds of form fields will be submitted to backend. Let's say imagine if you have 120 form fields here. If you try to read them here, right, you need to apply all that read logic here. Request dot get parameter of field A, B, C, D until all 100 fields. And whatever validations required, you need to apply them. And any data type conversions, you need to do that. What are all the problems here? If I go with the servlets, for each view one servlet, no centralized, not a centralized architecture. You don't have centralized controller. So if it is not a centralized, maintaining security, validations, exception handling, logging, all this will be difficult to you. And not only that, You need to always do manual read and response operations. Manually need to read each parameter one by one, and the data type conversions, like if you are submitting integer from front end, you will be getting in the form of string only. The data type typecasting operations, everything you should deal here. Lot of time you need to spend, literally you need to spend lot of time with servlet. And the main problem is not centralized. If it is a centralized, like in AOP, we saw, right, a benefit that you can have any number of classes already implemented, thousands of business classes. If you want to apply logging, you need not to interrupt them. On the fly, AOP will go and apply the logging for each and every class. How that you benefited? Because Spring somehow managing all your objects. A centralized container we have, a container managing all your objects, so that via that container I am applying whatever features, extra features I want for my application. I have a control over the flow, so that I can add anything new to my application. Easily I can control my application by just sitting into one position. If I have scattered my request into multiple servlets, if I want to put validations or security, for each class I should go and I should apply security there, or validations I should go to each class and I should apply there. If I need login, I should visit each class. Exception handling, I literally we don't have any control over it. If there is any error, directly see that it will go to front end and it will show the complete exception trace until unless you configure any error pages. And read write operations are very difficult. So to overcome these, right, to overcome these, frameworks were introduced and they followed front controller pattern. What it do? In front controller design pattern, frameworks designed in such a way that always all your front end requests will go to one single servlet only. First thing what they did, one single servlet implemented, only one servlet. One means one, not many. Only one single servlet implemented as part of their framework. Either you say Spring, Struts, JSF, whatever it is. In Struts, if you see, they used action servlet. This is servlet class. In servlet 1.x, they used this action servlet as a front controller. In Spring, we are using dispatcher servlet. JSF used some faces servlet. In Jersey, you can see something servlet dispatcher. In Jersey library, servlet dispatcher you can see. So many frameworks with the different servlet classes, they came up and added so many features. Hmm. No, EJB is not for MVC. EJB we use from business logic, from business layer. In in MVC architecture, the last two layers, right? Apart from your controller and for business layer, from business layer onwards, we use EJB for business and DAOs. Here we use EJB session beans. Here we use EJB entity beans. Okay, we are up to here this layer only, controller layer only. This layer only we are talking about. Okay. So for EJBs used to handle business and DAO operations, not controller operations. In EJB days also, right? People used to work on servlets here for controller. With the servlet combination, with the struts framework combination, they used it. Servlets with EJBs or servlet with struts. Then once Spring came, Spring strictly avoided EJBs. Still you can use and integrate with Spring. It will not stop you. Yes. No business and DAO. It's up to your application actually. In case if it is strict business, if you have with a lot of transactions and ORM, if you need EJBs are the best possible modules that we used to have. Otherwise, you can use simple core here. Struts is not going to provide you any business features, DO features. Here you can use JDBC or Hibernate. Okay. Yeah. Up to controller part only. Struts framework, JSF framework, they helped up to controller part. The remaining business DAO you can handle using simple core Java JDBC. Okay. So this you can use this EJBs. Yeah, with this combination, plain core Java combination or EJBs combination also you may go. Okay. So up to controller part only this frameworks are helping. Even your Spring MVC framework also up to controller only. Up to this part, what you are using later, other modules, Spring AOP, Spring JDBC, Spring ORM. That is what right we thought up to controller part MVC framework will help. Okay, so these all frameworks choose a front controller pattern and they designed one servlet only, one single servlet they designed. What this servlet is capable of coming to especially your dispatcher servlet or all these servlets. So first all your front ends request you need to map strictly you should map all your views request to one controller only as per front controller design pattern. You have to map all your request to front controller only. In such a way, you need to configure URL pattern. How I can map all my views request to one servlet? When you have each view mapping to each servlet, where we used to do this mapping? In web.xml file. This mapping we used to do in web.xml file. Within web.xml file, we used to configure front end to back end. View to servlet mapping we used to do using which tags? This tag. So this is view. From view I am getting this URL pattern and mapping to this servlet. So this is a view to servlet mapping we used to do. So each view used to have a separate servlet. We used to map multiple servlets here. Registration form to registration servlet, login form to login servlet, some XYZ form to XYZ servlet. But framework saying don't use any servlet. I will use it for you. You don't use any servlet. So configure my servlet in your servlet flex. frameworks given the servlets. Where exactly you need to fit the servlet means in place of your servlet class. Which all URL patterns I can map? Any URL pattern means any form you can map to your servlet. Let's say if I have 5 forms, can I configure that 5 forms here? Like one registration form I have. Shall I can I hard code here? Registration, login, something else, some view. You can map. You can map your 5 forms, 10 forms, or 100 forms. You can hard code your all front ends here. Front end 1, front end 2, front end 3. All these front ends are mapping to this back end only, one single servlet only. But how many such you can map? Your application keep on growing, keep on multiple pages are adding. Do you go each time to this web.xml and add your front end request here? That is very difficult. If you have thousands of mappings, it is very difficult to go there and add. It's okay if you want to add, you can add. But always you need to go there and add it. Instead, you adding each form here. If you can put some URL pattern expression here, like star dot star, which means send me any request, send me anything, I will accept it. So that you need not to configure or hard code all your forms mapping here. All your front ends mappings you need not to hard code in your web.xml file. If I configure this expression, it will through the web.xml and it will go to dispatch servlet. Your web.xml will say to Tomcat, if you configure star dot star, if you configure with URL pattern star dot star, what does it mean to Tomcat means? We are saying, hey Tomcat, allow any request and forward it to me. So it will not control now. I mean, it will not put any restrictions. Let's accept any request which is coming from view. Straight away it will forward to your dispatcher servlet. Because one single servlet only I configured. So always my all forms data will hit to this single servlet only. So this is where we call this controller as a front controller. If a controller accepting all your views request, if a front controller is there to deal all your views request, you may call it as front controller. Multiple views to one controller we call front controller. What this front controller need to do after this? We identified the problems right with servlets. No centralized. Now it is centralized. Now your flow is centralized. All requests are coming to dispatcher servlet only. Now onwards, maintaining security, applying validations, exception handling, or if you want to apply logs, or the difficulty part, reading the data and sending the response, data type conversions. You need not to bother about it. Just the servlet will understand your pain and it will give data directly by converting your JSON object into simple Java object. In advanced concepts, we'll see that. Yes, excuse me. In servlets, yeah, we will see global exception handling. Global exception handling. Exception advisors we have, we will use them. Okay. We will do one end-to-end application once after a Spring Boot, right? We apply all the concepts together and implement it. Okay. Yeah. So this dispatcher servlet will accept all forms request first. From here, I implemented my login form fields. I added my login form fields here, registration form fields here, some XYZ form fields here in this browser. I mean in this view. How it will know my requirement? How it will read them? It will not read. Just it will delegate the request from here to your specific controller. Once it gets the request right, in advanced level, but yeah, of course, it will do all that front end to back end, data mapping. So all your data first will hit to dispatcher subnet. All your views data, right? If you consider all these are views, and this is your controller who takes the request, dispatcher subnet controller. It is not a normal controller, it is a front controller. Boss for your all controllers. Front controller, dispatcher servlet. So all your requests will hit to dispatcher servlet first. From here, hmm, business layer, correct. Bro, we can actually advisors, exception advisor is similar to that. Okay, we can apply. No such limitation, but usually we apply mostly right for business layer, because once after getting the data, actual business dealing in the business layer, right? So there mostly you might have a requirement. Controller do nothing, right? Just read and sends data to you. Yeah. So once you get the data here from your form, let's say you have some student registration form here, student form, employee form, something manager form, something login, logout, multiple request forms you have here. So each form you can map to its own advised controller, to its own controller. For each form, you can have a separate controller class here, or for multiple forms also you can have. Let's say you have for student itself, you have multiple CRUD operations: save, update, delete, select. For all that use cases, you can have one single controller here. So for each form considered, you can write one controller class here. You can have your controller either using programmatic approach or with annotations we can handle it. Programmatic approach is very old approach, nobody using it, but I'll give you example one two. Mostly we use annotations only, more focus required here. So using annotation or a programmatic approach, for each form you can have a controller class. So all the student registration related read operations that you can perform here, employee operations you can perform in employee controller, manager operations perform in manager controller, login operations, logout operations, if you need separate controllers, you can have them here. How it will recognize this front controller, the student form data need to go to this controller, employee form data should go to this controller. First level mapping we have done. Web.xml file helped here to map first level view to controller, front controller. Here we managed it with star dot star dot star dot some expression. We mapped all front ends to dispatcher servlet. How we are mapping once getting data here, how dispatcher servlet will map to a specific controller. I have a student controller here which handle student registration or update delete operations. I have an employee form here to manage some employees. For managers, I have a manager controller. We do only dispatcher. In web.xml file, what we did, front end to front controller mapping only we have done. Your front end to front controller only, which is framework servlet. Not only that, in spring.xml file, we do this mapping. Front controller, how this front controller recognize your address? If I send a postal card to you, somewhere you are in US, if I write with your address and if I put it in Dropbox, they will pick up and read your address and they will redirect it to you. So this is like a post office. First, all my cards will go to this post office. From here, it will distribute it. To distribute, it needs two addresses. All post letters came here into this Dropbox. From here, it needs to distribute. So it needs two address of each destination controller. Where do we configure that? From where it is coming to where it should go, we configure in this Spring XML file. This front end to controller mapping. Front end to dispatcher select you have mapped here. So all your request came here. Now for your front end a specific controller is there. That mapping you have to do under Spring XML file. Your form to specified controller. Whatever controller you implemented, you have to configure that in this XML file. So that by reading this XML file, who reads this XML? Spring XML file will read by dispatcher servlet. Who need to guide once a request coming from front end here? Dispatcher servlet only need to guide. Who read web.xml file? Tomcat will read. Who reads and manage this front end to dispatcher servlet flow? Your Tomcat. Tomcat will read web.xml file and it will help you to map your front end request to up to dispatcher servlet. Now it's a dispatcher related duty to map your front end to controller. By reading this XML file, it will do that. Only front end to controller mapping we do? No. So far we learned all our beans we configure here, which is business classes, DO classes, connection pool classes, everything. Apart from form to controller mapping, business DO connection pool classes also we can configure. AOP also we can configure. Everything will be there in your Spring XML file, including your front end to back end controller mapping, then controller to your beans mapping. Everything is part of XML. So far I learned this XML can be loaded into IOC and I can get that beans. Now who do that for us? Dispatcher Servlet will do it for you. Spring XML file will be loaded into web to application context container. Your XML will be loaded here. Your Spring XML will be loaded here and this dispatcher servlet will handle now onwards. When there is a request from front end, right? When there is a request from front end, it will read your form action name. So based on your action, right, it will call the getBean method and it will get your controller object. It will get your controller object and see the your request will take it forward to that specific controller. Now, who is mapping front end to dispatcher servlet? Tell me that. Who is doing this mapping your front end to dispatcher servlet? In web.xml, we configured, right? So based on that mapping, the request flows from your front end to dispatcher servlet. Now, this dispatcher servlet is a predefined class. You need not to edit and do any code changes here. So for your front end, where do you need to write read operations? My front end data need to be read somewhere. What where I should able to read that, which place? Controller. You need to write your controller classes. How? Automatic means how? How we don't know the destination? Huh. So here you will be putting your URL, something URL you will put here. So when you hit that URL will be received to dispatcher servlet. But for that URL, who are saying it need to execute student controller or employee controller or manager? I have a lot of controllers. For which form, which controller should execute? You don't have that intelligence. You need to say. You need to configure. Excuse me. In yesterday's example also, if you see, right? Here I mapped my front end all forms to dispatcher servlet. So when I submit this form, name, email, address, data, let me complete it. So when I submit this name, email, address, data, it goes to dispatcher servlet. Now, how this dispatcher servlet is identifying that request should go to this hello controller? We have done that mapping here, right? Via this name. Again, your URL configured here and specified your controller here. So dispatcher servlet now recognizing, okay, that front end should go to this backend controller. So each front end and backend mapping we do here, either via annotation or this with this bean tags. No, no, no. View resolver is a helper class. You are going beyond my discussion. I even not talked about view resolver or something else. I'm just trying to make you understand this high level, what it do. Spring.xml, correct. So far what we did, we simply created our beans and configured those beans into one XML file. We created all the beans and configured it into XML file. And front end not yet involved. Now front end involved here. So now as soon as you are integrating with your front end and making it as a web application, you create one Spring XML file here and do all your beans configurations here, your connection pools, business classes, AOPs, component scannings, auto wiring. Now this is the place where you need to do all that mappings which you learned so far. This is your Spring XML file. So this Spring, everything falls here. JDBC, your connection pool configuration, business class, AOP, your ORM integrations, everything plays in here in this XML. You know two approaches. If not XML, you do all that stuff with the stereotypes, configurations with configuration and at the rate B. Web.xml file for Tomcat, not for dispatcher servlet. During your application start, during application startup, when you start your Tomcat, right? First job it will do, it will read your web.xml file. Will be readed by your yeah. First Tomcat will read web.xml and it will create object for your servlet. Who is the container for dispatcher servlet? Tomcat is the container. Without Tomcat, you can't imagine dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet is a servlet. This servlet object created and managed by Tomcat. And Tomcat will manage all your objects. Tomcat is starting one more container, web application context. This web application context is going to manage all the leftover layer, right? Controllers, from controllers to business classes, your AOP classes, log classes, or mail classes, whatever you implement, your DO classes, everything. Hmm. Web application context is your IOC content. Inside dispatcher servlet. Correct. As soon as Tomcat creates dispatcher servlet object, inside dispatcher servlet init method, there are life cycle methods like init destroy in servlets. This init method will be called by Tomcat. Immediately, as soon as dispatcher servlet objects creates, right? Tomcat will call init method of your dispatcher servlet. Inside init method, this web application context container is starting. This code, container code, right? We used to start our containers by creating object, right? Application context AP equal to new class path application context. Similarly, web application context code has been written inside init method. That init method is loading your XML file. As soon as your XML loads, what it will do, IOC container, it creates, it will start creating objects. Which objects it will create? Which XML file I am loading? Spring XML. Hmm. All the classes. Where you put efforts to implement 100 classes, all your 100 classes objects are created here. By whom? Your IOC container only. But I did not place any code for IOC container. You need not to place. Dispatcher servlet is having that logic now. So far, we have been, used that application context class to load XML and to create objects. Now, you can take rest. Standalone applications. Now you can relax. Dispatcher servlet is doing that for you. It reads your XML file and it load it into IOC. What it will do? Immediately it will create all your objects by using, if you are using stereotype annotations, by scanning your packages. If you are using the simple programmatic approaches and configuring XML file by reading your bin tags. Whatever approach you take, it helps you to create objects. Beans, simple beans. No. Where do we hold objects? Will Tomcat? Yeah, which memory? JVM. So all objects, even your dispatcher servlet object or all the objects loads into JVM only. Who holds that object? Tomcat holds dispatcher servlet object. Dispatcher servlet holds controller objects. Not only controller, all the objects. Hmm. Object end of the day is JVM only. JVM is the you know place where it need to create any object created by. whomsoever, right? Created by Tomcat, created by you or WebLogic, JBoss. If object created means that should load it into your JVM only. Without JVM, no object. Yeah, yeah. Just go through it once again, the example, and you can connect with me. Okay, we will see. Okay. No? Yeah, go to recording and just reach out to me personally. Okay, I'll explain you. Have you went through that video at the rate configuration being why at the rate conf? Yeah, go through it and yeah, that is very important. That's why I stress so much. Why configuration and at the rate being is very very important. Yeah. Anyway, all your classes objects are managed by your IOC, which is placed inside a dispatcher servlet. Okay, and your dispatcher servlet object managed by Tomcat. Okay, let's whomsoever manage it. But if I try to understand the request flow, first when I hit the request from form, straight away the request will go to Tomcat. Tomcat will redirect your request to dispatcher servlet. Then dispatcher servlet needs understanding here. For this form, which controller should be executed? That it will understand via this mapping. Form to controller mapping we do. So using this form to controller mapping, dispatcher servlets will map your request to controller. After here, maybe via auto wiring, this beans already injected here. So the same beans you can use to take it forward your request from controller to business, business to DAO, DAO to database. Okay. Usually this flow we know via auto wiring all these objects injected till here. So using that auto wired object, you can take it forward. We will see end to end example. Okay. Now by including all the concepts, so most of your confusions will be resolved. But here we understand only forward flow. Front end to back end till controller, I got the request, which is fine. If I want to send a response back, where do I need to configure this response flow? Okay, that we will see. No, we should. No, no. Now, yeah, you were asking, right? View resolver. We talk about it now. We talk about it in tomorrow's session. Front end to back end, back end to front end. Yeah, that's why I was expecting that question from you, but we deviated and went to front control. Okay, so in last example also, if you people see, we did this example, you people must have asked it. Hello controller, we implemented. Hello world. Front end to back end only I implemented. Nobody asked me question how I can send response back. So this is front end and implemented controller. When I start it, localhost 9090 slash hello world. Request went white page I am seeing here. And in the backend I'm reading data and somehow. printing it. But where is the response back? Usually we will have both the flows, right? Front end to back end, the request went from back end to front end. If I pull back something, or if I want to say something success, there is your registration went success. How can I get it here? Okay, that we see. Yeah, that we discuss tomorrow. Okay, depth, one more level, right? We go depth and we will understand forward flow and response flow. Okay, which this one? No, not the servlet, right? This is our controller. We used a controller, Spring controller on. Finally, we are returning null, nothing given. Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah, yeah. So, so this is what, right? Tomorrow we will see. Actually, that is what we planned for today. But yeah, we went to front controller discussion, so can't able to accommodate. Right? Tomorrow we will see front end to back end. Yeah, to a request and response flows, how it happens. Okay, both we will discuss, and we can go more in depth into controllers. Okay, and annotations part. Okay, so